Well, welcome back, everybody. The majority of my Tech Whispers audience knows Janet Sherlock, but I don't think many know the full extent of her career journey and her incredible body of work. So today, we're going to unpack that with many rich learnings of Dr. Sherlock. Janet is a digital and retail executive who has modernized organizations, processes, and solutions through her expertise in digital transformation, customer experience, omnichannel strategy, data and AI and ML, marketing strategies, and much, much more. Janet has held various P&L and technology leadership roles over the years in amazing brand companies such as British Petroleum and ExxonMobile, Guess, and Carter's. We know all those companies very well. Most recently, we know Janet from her work as the Chief Digital and Technology Officer at Ralph Lauren Corporation, where she was responsible for the company's global e-commerce strategy and revenue. In addition, she and her team drove Ralph Lauren's digital transformation. So a lot for us to unpack, a lot of learnings here. Janet, welcome to the podcast. And as you look across all these incredible roles in big brand companies, is there a common thread, a theme that cuts across this amazing career journey of yours?
Well, Dan, thank you for having me as a guest on your Tech Whisperers podcast. I am so incredibly honored to be here. So to answer your question, yeah, there's an obvious common thread, and that is that most of my roles were either consumer-facing or retail-centric. And while they've all had that same common theme, it's probably the different aspects of them that have been the most beneficial in my career development, whether it was because they were small companies or large companies or extra large companies, public or private, and then throw an advisory practice in there as well. You learn so much from juxtaposing the different approaches for the same kind of things in companies, like how they approach innovation, or maybe how they approach mergers or acquisitions, risk appetite, or even things like differing HR practices. But I've been able to leverage those commonalities and those differences to build off of each unique experience. Like, for example, I was in a recent RFID strategy session at Ralph Lauren, who in their own right are leaders in the applicability of RFID. But I was reflecting on one of my very first forays with RFID while I was at Mobil Oil, which is now ExxonMobile after the acquisition. I was at the very beginning of my career journey, but I helped to implement the speed pass. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
Yeah, it was one of the very first commercial consumer-facing uses of RFID, and it was very sophisticated for its time. You would drive up and it authorized the pump, it knew your credit card information. Well, anyway, here we are, decades later, but everything can still build from those uses and those learnings. It's really interesting, Dan, because when we think about innovation, we think about new and undiscovered things. But for truly useful innovation, you really need to honor and build upon the past to create the future.
That is incredible. Imagine if our 20-something-year-old selves, if we could have a view of these career journeys, wouldn't that be amazing? And you could never write the script, though, right?
You don't necessarily know what the future holds.
Yeah, I love that point about innovation, Janet. And one of the things I wanted to highlight about you, we just had Ken Spangler and Steve Davis on recently talking about the importance of building AQ, adaptability quotient. And I think about you, I think of strong AQ, incredible IQ, amazing EQ. I mean, you've got incredible EQ, which I think leads to, I'm going to come up with a new one, which is the Janet Sherlock LQ, the likability quotient. Everybody loves Janet. People migrate to you, they follow you, they want to work for you, they're energized by you. And so how do you balance these big, big jobs, all the pressure, the demands, business results, holding people accountable, and still pull off this high LQ?
Dan, that is so incredibly kind. I'm actually here at your kind words. And there actually is something that exists called a likability quotient. But, I'm an extrovert by nature and by definition. I truly draw my energy from others. I genuinely like people and find them fascinating. So those behaviors that make up things that are in the likability quotient, like asking questions and smiling and acknowledging people, they come pretty naturally for me. But over the course of my career, the thing that has taken a lot more practice is sharing those hard truths. But it is a practice that takes honing, and it's really well worth that practice. You have to find a way to be clear and direct while still being respectful. I think it's one of the highest forms of miscommunication among managers and leaders. People often think that they're coaching or providing constructive feedback, but they're sugarcoating it so much that that message gets lost by the recipient. Not being clear, direct, and honest is far more hurtful than being afraid to hurt someone's feelings.
That's just gold. And just, for our profession, as we continue to evolve, right, as leaders, just, you got it right there. You got the Janet Sherlock IQ, EQ, AQ, and LQ, and some good tips there. Fantastic. Janet, we've got amazing mystery questioners. Like, these are passionate people. Couldn't wait to ask you these questions. You have no idea who they are, which is so fun. And but this first one is around really about your last role. And I remember when you took on this role at Ralph Lauren, I thought, gosh, they could not have found a better executive to lead this company, lead this function. You are a brand ambassador, like extraordinaire. So let's listen into our first mystery questioner. You're going to have some fun with this one.
Janet is a perfect match in her role at Ralph Lauren. Janet, did you do that on purpose? And how would you really advise people to think about their alignment with the company and the brand versus the technology remit that they will have within a company? I think it's a superpower that you exerted when you found that match that was so perfect between Janet and Ralph Lauren.
Who is that?
I recognize that voice. That is my dear friend, Karen Ann Terrell, aka Kat. She's not just a tech legend, she is a human legend as well. We're both actively involved in T200, an organization that's comprised of women CXOs in tech that focuses on advancing women's leadership in the field of technology. And that's a great question. And I love how you both think that I embody the Ralph Lauren way, and I'm sure you can see it in how I dress. I definitely I sport the brand. I typically wear it head to toe, but I do think that each company that I've been with has had a unique culture that has summoned up a different aspect of me as an individual and as a leader. And Ralph Lauren is truly special with an incredible culture. And its purpose of inspiring the dream of a better life through authenticity and timeless style really resonates with me personally. But what's interesting though is when Spencer Stewart contacted me for the role at Ralph Lauren, they were surprised that I was interested. They thought that I would have a perspective of, oh, been there, done that, because I'd had that global retail, wholesale, e-commerce, apparel experience at companies like Carter's and Guess. But from my perspective, it was Ralph Lauren. I mean, one of the most beloved and well-known brands out there, and really just wanted to be a part of that legacy. However, as I reflect back at some of the choices that I've made in my career, perhaps I did choose roles that were probably more comfortable paths for me. So, while I think I wanted to leverage the experience that I had in, retail, wholesale, e-commerce, apparel, and I knew that it would benefit the companies that I was joining, I think that I also wanted to be more assured of success. So I guess my advice would be, culture and fit are extremely important, but don't just look for a good fit. Ensure that you are stretching yourself with every opportunity that you have.
I think that culture and fit thing, right? When we get that wrong, it's just miserable. And we know what that's like. And Karen Ann, thank you. Always just special. We did a podcast together with Diana McKenzie a couple months back, and it was really on the journey to chapter 2, which we'll talk more about later. And they're just phenomenal people. But I've got another mystery question for you from another good friend. It's along the lines of roles. This is going to be one of those poke the bear, spark a conversation with Janet issues. So listen in to our second mystery questioner here.
Hey, Janet, we've known each other for good 10, 12 years. And one thing that I've really admired about you is your tenacity and understanding of what the business that you're in needs from you and what talent you need and how you should go about doing that. One of the things that we've shared is our common disdain or view of all of these new chiefs that people keep bringing out: chief technology officer, chief digital officer, chief AI officer now. And my question to you is, what are the few things that a CIO needs to do to really make sure that their management, the CEO, doesn't feel the need to have all of these different chiefs and appoint them?
Is my very dear friend, Anil Cherian. We became buddies in the Atlanta tech community and remain very close friends today. Man, I miss the camaraderie of the Atlanta tech community. And I loved Anil's recent episode of Tech Whispers with you, Dan. And I'm glad to be following in his footsteps here today. So I don't know if I would call it disdain. I would probably say that it was more of an inquisitiveness about the phenomenon of this C-suite alphabet soup that we're seeing today. And this is why I undertook this topic in my doctoral research, which was entitled "The Organizational Impacts of Executive Technology Leadership Role Proliferation." And those impacts are actually quite profound, but that's actually not what Anil asked about. He asked about what a CIO should do to prevent that proliferation in the first place. So, first, I would make certain that the CEO, the CHRO, and the board view you in the light of being a fully comprehensive business and tech leader with a full command of the trends out there. And this is where you have to be really honest with yourself. If they don't view you in this light, you're really going to have an uphill battle when there's a new imperative. So it really is important to make sure that you then demonstrate those skills with credibility across the executive team and the board. Make sure that they view those as evident in you. And then you have to stay skilled and current. The best example of this, Dan, is when the consumerization of generative AI became this massive sensation in the fourth quarter of 2023. No one had a leg up on the CIOs. The consulting firms had no better knowledge or experience in this space than any CIO would have. So there were a few, academians and a few large tech companies that had credibility and practices and platforms in the space, but it wasn't widely known. So as a CIO, if you didn't lean in yourself with key members of your team, it was likely that somebody else, whether inside or outside your organization, started to have more influence in the space than you did, which is a lost opportunity for everyone involved.
Well, Anil, thank you so much. That was an amazing question, something that is really near and dear to Janet's heart. And Jan, I know you care about your peers and you want them to be successful, and this never been a better time. But we have another mystery questioner, another one of your industry legend friends, which speaks to the company that you keep. What's interesting to me, Jan, I'm just realizing today, I don't know why I didn't dominate before, but I have a lot of the same people who are guest mystery questioners for each other, because you all, the best know each other. Like you and Anil and Karen Ann and this other individual who's going to come up here, you all know each other. So let's tee up this third mystery questioner and what might be the number one leadership superpower of Dr. Janet Sherlock. So listen in.
Dr. Sherlock, I have long thought of you as a great strategic thinker and one that is led the way in developing strategy. My question for you is really around the intersection of strategy and org design. What are your thoughts around the design of technology organizations as it relates to the strategy specific?
Smith, my friend and collaborator here in the New York metro area. Michael and I worked with several other CIOs and tech leaders to create Tech Pact in 2020, which is a nonprofit group focused on reducing the digital divide and fostering diversity in the field of technology. And then Michael is also the founder of Tech Day in Pink. And I see you're wearing your pink today, Dan, as well. And Tech Day in Pink is an annual effort to raise awareness, education, and fundraising for breast cancer, which is a cause near and dear to my heart. And again, not just a great tech leader, but a great human being. So thank you for having him as a guest, Dan. And that is a really good question that Michael asked. And I could tell he was respecting my focus on org design as well. And I'd hate to give an ambiguous answer to Michael's question, but it really does depend. As most organizational design questions are all really dependent on some factors within the company. But it does depend on the nature of the business and the organization to support things like brands and product families, geographies, or channels. And the organization that Michael represents, Estee Lauder, definitely has its complexity in all of those areas. But probably one of the most complicated things that a tech leader needs to determine is which services are going to be shared services and what needs to be unique by division, geography, brand, or however the company or organization is structured or what it provides. So I really recommend that you try to achieve as much shared capabilities as possible and reinforce it. It really is your obligation as the business executive responsible for technology. And it's not just about leveraging the spend, it is about better management and efficiency for things like data management, AI, cybersecurity, digital platforms, or even things like MarTech. In this day and age, leveraging data assets and capabilities is just as critical as financial leverage.
Yeah, so good. Michael, thank you. Does he always call you Dr. Sherlock?
Well, it's still is relatively new for me, so it's relatively new for him to call me that as well.
So fun. But I did, knowing that we would be launching this just after Tech Day of Pink, which is very near and dear to Michael, and for you, that's the reason for the pink shirt today. So yeah, another mystery question for you. I do want to come back, and I have a bunch of questions for you around org design, how you approach that, the research you did, your doctorate degree around that. But your friend Karen Ann had a second, actually she had a bunch, but I have a second mystery question for her, which is not a mystery now because you know it's her. But let's listen in and we'll have some fun with Karen Ann part 2.
Janet has done it beautifully and exactly correct as she's planned her move from her operating career to Janet Sherlock 2.0. Janet, you don't know it, but that is an incredible superpower for all of us out here in technology who are in the process, either the early process or the later stage of planning our move into what is next after our operating career. Can you talk about that process where you went and got a PhD and how you knew that that's what you wanted to do next and how long you've been planning that?
Question, and I highly recommend you referred to the podcast that she had done with Diane McKenzie on their 2.0 career transitions, and I highly recommend listening to that episode. It was great. And in that episode, Karen Ann talks about how she spends about a third of her time helping others, and I can attest to that personally. She has been an amazing resource for me and true support as I've planned my semi-retirement. This woman has proactively contacted me to help me and get me ready, whether it's introducing me to people who might be helpful for my new practices, or even some of the emotional adjustments that come along with going into the new chapter of semi-retirement or changing gears. And spoke to me about how emotionally it's going to feel to not be working with a large team, to the practicalities of not having an EA or a tech team to support you. And she's also helped quell my fears about losing my relevant knowledge in things like AI and cyber, which change so rapidly once I leave my practitioner role. So I cannot say enough about her friendship and support. She is truly living up to her CAT 2.0 goals, where I am concerned as far as being supportive of others who are going through their journeys. To answer her question about the things that fueled my doctoral journey. So, well, first, as a lifelong learner, I really, really enjoyed the research, both the scholarly literature research as well as my quantitative and qualitative research. And the next reason I think is because as we all become more experienced as leaders, you really do appreciate that people and behaviors and motivations are really what drives business and results. And I am fascinated by what motivates people. So I wanted to focus more on the human side of things than necessarily technology itself as I went into my next chapter. A lot of my colleagues are starting advisory practices focused on tech or on digital strategies, but I'm pivoting so much that in addition to relying upon my experience, I really wanted to have the research studies and the doctorate to help provide extra authority in an area where I'm a little bit more new in. So that was pretty much the reason for pursuing my advanced and terminal degree of a doctorate. But it was a wonderful experience. And I do highly recommend for those wanting to extend their knowledge or build upon their practice or really be able to dig into research and have it be a credible source to consider also obtaining their doctorate.
Yeah. I don't know how you did it, Janet, but you just did it with a smile and you just got through it and you ran this major function at the company and all your philanthropic work, just incredible. But I'd love to dig in a little bit more in the study, in terms of maybe some of the scope, the focus on the org design, the title, the conversation around titles and what that means, and maybe how do we get here today, with some of these things. So just take it from there. I know there's so much to it. We don't have enough time, but can you give us some highlights?
Yeah, so as I think I mentioned earlier, my research study was entitled "The Organizational Impacts of Executive Technology Leadership Role Proliferation." I was seeing this phenomenon more and more of C-level roles being created and often reporting to different parts of the organization. And while that's been a trend in the tech space, it's not unique to tech anymore. You're seeing it in marketing with CMOs sitting next to chief experience officers. You have chief commercial officers who are saying, wait a minute, who's this chief growth officer? I thought that was my responsibility to drive growth. So, but I specifically studied the tech area so that I can manage the scope. But what I wanted to understand was the impact on clarity, workplace climate, and productivity. I went into the study with the hypothesis that it likely had a negative impact. But it was so much more severe than I thought, Dan. People are desperate for clarity, and overlapping roles and responsibilities are clearly crippling organizations today.
Well, that's really interesting. So tell us more about the scope, Janet, and why this is so important. And for me, it's like every board, C-suite member, CXO needs to listen hard to this.
Yes. So on the scope, I really did focus on organizational structure and not necessarily titles, but titles are important, actually very important. And it certainly hasn't been that helpful having ambiguous terms and lexicon in titles and in departments. And there is definitely a sea fever and a trend on inflated titles. But for leadership and boards, it is essential to look at structure before looking at titles and people. Currently, far too many organizations are starting with the person and building roles around them. You'd be surprised, but this is a phenomenon that's happening in large companies just as much as it's happening in smaller companies. And sometimes it's with very good reason. Sometimes it's necessary for things like succession planning or other valid reasons. But it really should be the exception and not the rule. It should be scope, structure, title, person, and not person, title, scope, structure, which has become common these days.
A little ready, fire, aim approach there. That's fascinating.
I sometimes refer to that as the organizational order of operations, sort of like, a math equation.
Right. Did you have a chance to unplug or uncork how we got here?
Yes, Dan. In the tech profession, since the 1980s, most companies had a single leader, the chief information officer, CIO. And in the 90s, that role became even more important, with big tech and ERPs and getting a little bit more sophisticated. But things started to shift in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s with the consumerization of technology. So that included social media, the internet, and the introduction of the iPhone in 2007. And so some CIOs were still like back office CIOs, and they were ill-equipped to handle the change. Sometimes they weren't supported by their CEOs. And then sometimes it was a land grab by other execs who wanted the cooler, newer, sexier things in parts of IT. And then in addition to that, how the world thinks about technology completely changed. Silicon Valley firms were very rightfully so credited with driving innovation and challenging the status quo. That was evident through office design and the benefits that they offered and the dress code. I'm not wearing my hoodie, but think of hoodies and sneakers. And the organizational design, hierarchies were eschewed and, chaos was often welcomed. So if you recall Sheryl Sandberg's famous line, if you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask what seat. But I think as we all saw, Silicon Valley firms eventually grew larger, matured, and became more traditional with hierarchical forms in their organizational structures. And that took shape because you need that kind of structure. So it's the combination of all these factors, the drive for innovation, the change in technology, the change of capabilities. There were factors that resulted in many companies creating a chief digital officer role in addition to the chief information officer. So that trend has continued with chief innovation, product, analytics, transformation, et cetera. And then this trend has expanded as well beyond the technology area in these days, Dan.
Speaking of clarity, I've never heard the evolution of our profession spoken so clearly, so succinctly, how we got here. Any other drivers, as you did your research, were there any other drivers that kind of drove us in terms of how we got here?
Yes, Dan, there is a large ecosystem that's also fueling some of this proliferation. It's the media. It is, in the tech space, educational institutions. It's not just the core academic programs that the educational institutions have, but if you look at it, all of the top executive companies, or not companies, educational institutions have executive programs. So a certificate in chief digital officer, certificate in customer experience officers. And these programs run from $20,000 to $30,000 at a pop. So the more of them there are, the more they benefit. There are professional and peer groups that charge a very hefty fee to organizations and individuals to join them so that you can work with your peers. So the more types of peers there are, the more that they benefit. Then, of course, there are the large management consulting firms, which are the usual place the companies go to look for assistance in organizational design. So adding in a chief AI officer and giving advice on that and telling what the remit should be is something that the management firms benefit from. And then last but not least, many of the executive search firms, the more C-level roles there are, the more searches they can have. I'm not saying that all of these organizations have a focus on this, but it definitely is an ecosystem of well-meaning, but yet financially driven institutions. And unfortunately, they do not know the harm that they're causing.
I've got the Tech Whispers audience whispering in my head right now saying, okay, we have a clear picture. We see the challenge, the problem, how we got here. What's the answer, Janet? Any thoughts there?
There is a phenomenon that my study supported. It's a theory, and it's known as a law called Conway's Law. So in the late 1960s, Melvin Conway empirically studied teams that were developing software, and he noted the correlation between the number of teams working on systems and the actual software product and the design itself. So for example, if there were 4 teams working on a software project, Conway observed that there were the software that they produced would have 4 distinct modules, 1 from each team. This happens because each team focuses on building their own part in the way that they're familiar with the specific communication patterns and collaboration habits that they have. So what Conway's Law suggests is that the product you design will inevitably mirror the organization that built it. In 2016, Dan, the University of Maryland and Microsoft studied Conway's Law and put it in perspective on a retrospective of Windows Vista, which I think we all remember not necessarily too fondly. And their findings, Microsoft themselves and the University of Maryland, was that organizational measures were able to predict failure proneness in Windows Vista with significant precision. So while they looked at all the factors, the biggest thing that impacted the failure of Windows Vista was the actual organizational design. And there's a more recent example of, if you look at the Chevy Volt, it was built with 3 HVAC systems, one that cools the battery, one that cools the cabin, and one that cools the electronics, as opposed to the Tesla 3, which only has one HVAC system because of the team structure that built it. So you're able to see this phenomenon. I mean, in consumer goods, whether it's apparel or consumer packaged goods, the assortments that companies have across either geographies or across different products, oftentimes you'll think that it's because it's differences in consumer behavior, say geographically or in different sectors. But that's often only times a factor in. Oftentimes it really is because different teams are doing the work differently. And it is a bit of protection, self-protection and self-preservation that the teams have their influence in looking different than the other teams. So Dan, there's no such thing as a perfect org design, and everyone can't be jumbled into one big fat team to avoid the negative impacts of Conway's Law. But what I know, especially after my studies, is that we have to be much more careful and conscious of the impact of how we design teams. And specifically in the technology space, capriciously or indiscriminately deciding to split the function up will likely end up having negative impacts on the organization.
Unbelievable. It's interesting, Janet. I've heard Conway's Law referenced about 3 times recently by really, really amazing CIOs. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. And do you remember the story of when he went to publish his paper? Remember what happened?
Oh, tell me.
I mean, he pitched it to the HBR. I think it was HBR, and they declined, right? And he ended up publishing it in Datamation, which nobody remembers that except for old people like me. But yeah, not bad for a failed paper.
I did know that. I thought that maybe you were going to say something different, but I was aware that he was declined by Harvard Business Review. And meanwhile, it's not just a technology phenomenon. It extends far beyond the technology space. You will get how your company is designed. That will manifest itself in what you produce.
Just got me thinking here. I'm going to make you a little uncomfortable. We're going to fast forward a decade or two, Janet, and looking back, we're going to be benefiting from, at least the next generation, will be benefiting from Sherlock's Law. Okay? What would Sherlock's Law be 20 years from now? That we're all going to look back on and say, wow, just like we did with Conway's Law, Moore's Law. So just have some fun with that.
Oh, I love that. If we were to create Sherlock's Law, I would very simply state it as structure enables results. There is a Peter Drucker saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I say that structure eats culture for lunch, dinner, and dessert. Korn Ferry just published an article very recently stating that 62% of employees have a nemesis at work. And there can be many reasons for that. However, overlapping functions is a breeding ground for conflict, competition, and contempt. Humans are simply not equipped to handle this type of conflict, especially not in the workplace, where there's so much of your self-worth and your income are depending on it. So I suppose I intend to spend the next 20 years evangelizing Sherlock's Law.
That is something to pay attention to, people. Take that, Mr. Drucker. It's, but just the way you described it, right? And the way of the world today, things are so fast. There's already just so much chaos and confusion. So if you can bring some clarity to that, get rid of some of that conflict. So you heard it here, Dr. Janet Sherlock. Structure will eat your culture for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Love it. I love it. Janet, another mystery question for you. And one of the reasons why I know I'm confident we're going to be talking about Sherlock's Law is because you are a master, phenomenal communicator. I've seen you in meetings. I've seen you one-on-one. I've seen you on stage in your Ralph Lauren suit. And you are a master communicator. So listen in to this next question, which will help unpack this superpower of yours.
Janet, I've heard many different things about some of the talks that you've given, the speeches that you've given, even some of your introductions have been magical. And people often come away from one of your talks inspired, moved, motivated, and they felt specifically differently about a particular topic or even about you. So can you give us some secrets about how do you inspire through words? What is your secret for putting together magical sentences and inspiring comments and delivering them in a way that actually moves people? It'd be amazing for you to share that secret with the rest of us.
It's so incredibly kind. I am so moved. That was lovely. I think that is Earl Newsom.
Mr. Earl Newsom. Yes, it is.
Well, I feel lucky that he sounded a little different, but you could still tell it. And what a lovely statement in that, and a wonderful question. So what I said before is that I really do like people, and when I am presenting, I really do want to share things that I believe that they'll benefit from. It was interesting though, Dan, I was, I've been speaking a little bit more lately about org design and about my research and findings. And a couple of months ago, I presented the concepts behind this overlap trap of overlapping C-suite roles at a conference where there were CIOs and CTOs and digital officers, transformation officers, chief experience officers, et cetera. And I thought this was going to be a tough crowd. And I was really surprised that it wasn't. There were so many leaders that came up to me afterward, and people with titles like, business transformation leader. There was a chief digital officer. and they had such positive comments. They may not have liked some of the direct messaging, but they were seeing the same things and feeling the same things. And I think that they were really pleased to have this brought to light. So I think that the point is if you're sharing real examples and facts and research and, even your own experiences, and you stay away from, platitudes and hypotheticals, and you put it in a context that your audience members will appreciate or bring it to a different light, your messages will likely resonate with them.
So good. Earl, what a great question. Earl's going to be on the podcast here. Been excited to get him on as well. And just one of the great people in our profession, great leaders. And, and you know Earl through some of your joint volunteer work, philanthropic work. And so I don't know how you all do it, but you held down this amazing role at Ralph Lauren, P&L responsibilities. You're on 2 boards. We're not going to have a chance to talk about your board work today, but you're on 2 boards. You get your doctorate degree, and you're still doing these amazing philanthropic efforts. So I've got someone from one of those groups that has a question for you, Janet. So listen in.
Tech Pact's mission is socially critical, but there are demonstrated tangible benefits to business. How have you seen this dynamic come to life in your teams?
That was our wonderful Tech Pact CEO, Kim Saxon. And that is a wonderful question and great coming from Kim. And, of course, it's important to foster an environment that supports diversity and belonging on your team. And but that mission is also served on a person-by-person basis. Going back to one of the other mystery questioners, Earl Newsom, he always refers to the +1. And especially now that I'm transitioning into a more into a different role where I don't necessarily have a team, I've been really focusing on that +1 mentality. It is so important to mentor and guide individuals in the community to inspire them to pursue tech careers, and then also to have retention of diversity in the tech space. And so, yes, it's a societal movement, but it is really also an effort that is tackled on a 1-by-1 basis.
Well, thanks to you and Michael Smith, Earl Newsom, your other founding members, Kim for being your CEO, for all this great work. And I've become a big fan over the years and just so impressed, so appreciative. And I think this would be a good place for us, Janet, not to lead the witness, but I'm going to do the Tech for Good scholarship right now. So as you know, we always make available a scholarship in our TechLX leadership program. And we do that on the podcast by giving our guests the ability to gift a seat in that program. It's a 9-month program. It's just world-class. It's IT specific. But we love to engage our STEM community, our nonprofits. But we're going to do something a little different, Janet. A, because you're so darn special. And B, I know that you would have been tortured if I said you had to give 1 seat. So we're going to give you 2 scholarships today to gift to 2 different organizations that you know and love and are involved in. So I think I know where you're going to go.
Dan, that is so incredibly generous. I cannot thank you enough. And you are absolutely right. I would not have known how I was going to choose. And I'm sure that you are thinking the same organizations that I am really pleased to support with your generous offer, Dan. And that is 2 organizations that I've mentioned today, which is T200 and Tech Pact. So I thank you so much for the work that you're doing and your generosity in supporting the community. And I'm thrilled to be able to support T200 and Tech Pact with these with your generous offer.
Well, you're most welcome. I appreciate the team being able to enable this and make this happen. And we actually have 4 T200 women going through that program right now through 4 other scholarships. So a lot of people know about the T200, support the T200. And So again, thanks to all the great work there that everyone's doing. Angela Yoakum and Marina Bellini and Wafa Mamili and Suda. So many Suja, so many great people. But a couple more questions for you before I let you go. Karen Ann made a reference to your brilliance in setting up chapter 2. And, I was with a good friend last week in Dallas. He's been in 35 years in his career, stellar career, retired about 3 months ago. And he's like, I have more stress now. He hasn't done a great job preparing for this chapter. You have. And so you're gonna make this change here shortly. What's next? What is chapter 2? What are you gonna be doing? And if we need help in this area, how do we find you?
Thank you, Dan. Yes, I am starting an advisory practice that is focused expressly on organizational design called OrgWorks. And my website isn't up quite yet, but it will be sometime soon. And in the meantime, you can reach me at janet@org.works.
Fantastic. I have been asked for years and years and years by CIOs, who should we be talking to for help around org design? I've never had a good answer, but now I do. So I'm excited. So we'll get all those links posted for you, and so people can find you. I think a hard question to answer, but I think it's just an appropriate question for you it's the legacy question. I think we've got a little insight today, but what's your legacy going to be as you hang up your operational career?
Oh my. I guess, just that I had a positive impact on the individuals who I worked with, the organizations I've led, and the companies I've worked for. Dan, I hope to keep building a legacy for helping companies to build stronger, less ambiguous, and more efficient organizations.
Well, I am confident even people who know you well learned new things today about you, learned new things from you. As Earl pointed out, inspired by you. Just really appreciate you making time, Janet. And you're just such a special individual. The Janet Sherlock likability quotient is higher than ever. And just excited to see this next chapter for you. And also, folks know to look forward to a week from now. We're going to work together on an article for CIO.com. And I would love, Janet, if you're willing to maybe share more deep dive on some of your secret sauce around how to design a great organization. I think that would be a great service to our profession.
I would be happy to. Thank you so much, Dan.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. The amazing Janet Sherlock, Dr. Janet, as we can now call her. And keep an eye out. It's OrgWorks, right? And some great
.works. There's no .com at the end of it. Works is a domain extension, and it's org.works.
I love it. Janet Sherlock, thanks so much, and excited about this next chapter for you.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Tech Whisperers, inside the playbook of the best digital leaders, a Woolette and Associates podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show, as this helps us connect the world's best digital leaders with those who aspire to learn, grow, and thrive in this amazing profession. Thanks for listening. Until next time.